Hi everyone, I'm Zihao. Today I'm going to be talking about how to survive in the Southern California restrictive market in multifamily, as well as recent events with the fire.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Get ready for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Join hundreds of real estate investors for networking, learning, and growth. Be sure to mark your calendars for April 24th and 25th of 2025. Hello and welcome to episode 480. Navigating multifamily real estate in today's market is challenging, but operating in one of the most restrictive states in the country, California, takes it to another level. My guest today, Zihao Wang, has built a real estate private equity firm that thrives in this environment. As the founder and CEO of Motiva Holdings, Zihao manages a $500 million multifamily portfolio. Growing up in a family of entrepreneurs and real estate investors, he gained firsthand experience in what it takes to operate, maintain, and scale real estate investments. Today, Zihao will share his approach to managing multifamily assets in restrictive markets, balancing risk and growth, and optimizing operations for long-term success. Zihao, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
I'd love to hear more about how you got started investing in real estate. And I know a lot of it started with your family.
Got into it through the family. Quick background on the family. We made our money in the fashion industry, started in the 80s in China in manufacturing, and then came to the United States in the early 2000s to start our own brand. It's still an active brand today. We sell to Nordstrom, TJ Maxx Marshall, Nordstrom Rack, Stitch Fix, etc.
What brand is it? What is the brand?
It's called Daniel Rain, women's clothing for anyone between kind of 40 to 60 years old. And yeah, got started into real estate I guess my parents started in real estate investing in '07, having bought their first property in Pasadena, California. Kind of was just local to them. So they felt it was, something that's easy to manage and something that they can handle while still operating their business. And then I joined the firm in 2016, started on the property management side, managing our family's assets and following our property manager around. And then 2 years later, moved into acquisitions and capital markets and have been growing the portfolio ever since.
What did you do before you joined the family firm and started kind of taking over management of the real estate assets? And what is it that prompted you to want to do that?
I got into real estate when I was around 13, 14 years old with the family. My parents really wanted me to kind of one day take over what the family has built. So the journey was really from being a student and then into a real estate investor, right? Being handheld by my parents. I think I really enjoy working with the family. It's something that, I can be very transparent about how I feel about certain assets, how I feel about certain investments, and get honest feedback as well. It's the path that I felt was helping me grow the fastest. So kind of that love of working with the family and also that, possibility of growing at a super fast pace by kind of being your own investor really drove me to work with the family and start growing the portfolio.
Give us a sense of the California market and your participation in it. I mean, where are you investing? What kind of properties do you own? And why California?
We primarily do multifamily. We do have some, mobile home parks and retail centers, but a majority of our portfolio is in multifamily. We like California because we're local to it, right? We are 2 hours away from all of our properties. We're vertically integrated with our own property management team. So because of how local we are and how well we know the market and how long we've been operating here, we feel the most comfortable in this space. And we feel like we have a competitive advantage against many others that may be out of state just because of how tight the regulations and the laws are. People who are not local aren't able to understand it to the extent that we do and navigate it to the extent that we do. So by having kind of the base here and having big operations here, we're actually able to, have a competitive edge against many other people. With that said, we are looking to diversify in other states. In 2018, we bought 3 assets, 2 in Florida and 1 in North Carolina, which we sold in like 2021 and then also 2024. So we have made efforts to diversify and are constantly looking at opportunities outside of California as well.
Let's talk about California. And I see the Golden Gate Bridge behind you there. Is your portfolio primarily in Northern California, or are you spread throughout?
Mainly in Southern California. So I live in Southern California. I live in Pasadena. So most of our portfolio is within LA County, Orange County, and the Inland Empire. We haven't stretched all the way down to San Diego yet, but kind of within those 3 counties, we own 37 properties and have been, our first one was started in 2007 by my mom, right, in Pasadena, around like 10 minutes from where we live.
What are the particulars of investing in that area? California is one of the most restrictive states in the country. And from what I hear, it's a horror show for real estate investors there. But you and your family have found a way to kind of actually do quite well. So what are the opposing forces that you find yourself dealing with, and how have you been able to navigate them?
It's mainly the regulations and the laws that restrict landlords from doing certain things. However, if you're a really, really good operator, for example, like our eviction laws are one of the strictest in the country. But for us, if we look at how we screen tenants, how rigorously we do that process, we were able to actually protect ourselves, down the road from an eviction. So a lot of that is, taking precautionary measures against the regulations that have been put in place.
For evictions, you have a better screening process so that you don't have to evict. But what about like rent control and tenants' rights, things like that?
In terms of rent control, we mainly operate in markets that are what we call statewide rent controls. So it's under the AB 1482 law, which allows CPI plus 5%. So for example, last year it was at 8.9% rent increase. So what we realized is that in those markets, that statewide rent increase actually outpaces a lot of kind of what normal increases are in the country. Right. If you buy something in, like, for example, Texas, in a normal market, we typically underwrite to around 3% rent growth. And so by having, by playing in markets that are what we call AB 1482 markets, we're actually able to get good rent increases as well. The areas that we avoid are typically the very local markets that have their own rent control. For example, the city of LA has their own rent control. The city of Santa Monica has their own rent control. So those cities are typically, probably like 60% of inflation or some other figure that are much less than what's natural in the market. And so we typically avoid those areas as well.
So you make an important distinction there, because people think of California and they just think rent control everywhere. And the truth is rent control is different depending on where you are. And it sounds like the rent control that the statewide rent control actually allows for a considerable amount of just rent growth each year.
So it allows for at least 5%, right? So it's 5% plus CPI. Even if inflation is 0, you still get to do your 5% increases. It's maxed out at 10% though. So it's the lesser of 5% plus CPI or 10%. And so basically, if, the economy is booming, inflation is high, other markets, like for example, Austin, we saw had like 20-30% year over year rent growth during the pandemic. Those kind of levels of rent growth we won't be able to see in California. The max we can do is 10%, but in like a normal market, right, where inflation isn't crazy high and the economy isn't crazy booming, I think California's rent growth is still very reasonable compared to other parts of the country.
Over the past 10 years, how have things changed for you? Are you seeing more demand, less demand? And what are some of the other challenges that you found being there in California?
The supply and demand story is very, very favorable to investors in California. The difficulty of building anywhere in California, right, not just in Southern California, is very legit. It takes many, many years to get approved for plans and entitlements. And then the cost to build is also extremely high due to land prices and also labor. So I think the supply is very, very short in Southern California. But then there are a lot of demand drivers here, right? So we have, for example, the Port of Long Beach, right? It was one of the biggest ports in the country, and many other industrial and both kind of financial business environments that drive a lot of demand, and also just the weather. So from a supply and demand perspective, I think demand outpaces supply by many, many folds. So in terms of that, I would say we really don't see much occupancy issues. Across our entire portfolio, we're anywhere between 99 to 100% occupied on all the properties. And that's year round, right? Not just in kind of the summer months. And so from that perspective, in terms of, keeping tenants, keeping properties occupied, and having demand for buildings, it's always there.
Have you bought existing product, or have you been doing any developing and building new product?
So we've done both. Out of like 37 projects, we've done 4 that were ground up developments. And then the remaining have always been acquisitions of existing apartments, typically value add strategies. And yeah.
Because you're vertically integrated and you're running the management for all these properties, what are some of the other efficiencies you've been able to find in doing so?
I think because we're vertically integrated, we've been able to do a lot of things faster than if it had been like a third-party property manager. Another thing that's very unique to California is the size of the buildings. So over here, it's very rare to see like a 300-unit building as you do maybe in like Texas or Florida or the Carolinas. Most buildings are much smaller, kind of under 50 units. And so we have a handful of buildings in our portfolio that are under the 50-unit range. And for third-party property managers, they take on the property, but they almost kind of ignore it since it doesn't really generate that much, profit for them. And so, if you have a 6-unit building, for example, and you give it to a property manager, they'll probably charge you like 4 to 5%, and then almost ignore it since it's like a very small building maybe in a location that they don't have that much coverage in. And so by being vertically integrated, we only charge 3% property management fee. So it's the same fee as if you go to like Texas and get a 300-unit building. And then also because of kind of where our properties are located and how we structured the company, we cover all of our assets to the extent that we want to. So from both like an actual dollar saved and an operation efficiency perspective, we've been very successful by being vertically integrated.
Are you managing for others, or do you just manage your own properties?
We only manage our own properties.
You hear a lot about insurance costs rising, and we're seeing that everywhere. But what I'm hearing is it's particularly bad in like Texas, Florida, and even California, especially with the recent fires. What are you noticing in your portfolio when it comes to insurance costs?
Insurance costs have definitely been rising. Unlike most people believe, like the fire, it will increase insurance, but it won't increase it that fast. So I don't think we'll actually see the effects of how it increases insurance until maybe a year or two later, when the insurance claims actually come back and insurance companies actually realize how much money they lost and stuff like that. But so far it's only been kind of like the natural progression of insurance rates rising, right? And that's due to both inflation and also a rise of interest rates. So from that perspective, I think we're very on par with some of the markets in like Texas. I wouldn't say we're as bad as Houston. I think we're probably closer to Dallas, and certainly not as bad as Florida, because we don't have kind of the weather events like hurricanes and tornadoes as some of the other markets.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. Save the date for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference happening April 24th and 25th of 2025 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This event is the perfect place to connect with fellow real estate investors, gain valuable insights, and elevate your real estate game. With a lineup of expert speakers and numerous networking opportunities, you won't want to miss it. You were telling me before I hit record about one of your properties that was kind of affected by the recent fire there. Can you share that with our audience, what you went through recently?
We're kind of in the middle of juggling it right now, but it was a 2-building property located in Altadena. One of the buildings burned down because of the fire. And so the other building somehow survived. Don't know how that happened. But basically, we're going through kind of insurance and, had a separate public agency that's helping us do the negotiation and a lot of the claims back. So I don't really know kind of the result of that yet because we're so early in the process, but it's something that we're juggling through right now.
Were your residents okay? And I mean, you have to go into crisis mode as a property management company. What were the steps you took when you knew that fire was approaching your property?
A lot of it was just keeping up with kind of what the city and our government was telling us, right? So a lot of it was like no one really knew what was going to happen and the exact steps to take, right? It was more just keeping our hand on the pulse, right? Understanding what's happening and kind of being as flexible and adaptive as possible. So it was good that one of our other buildings in Pasadena, our new construction, actually 63 units just finished and we're in lease up right now. And so we placed a lot of our tenants into that new building at market rates, right? And it was a good thing that many of our tenants cooperated with an increase in rents. A lot of it was just adapt and see what was going on, kind of get as much information as possible from the city and then just adapt as quickly as possible. I don't think anybody was really that well prepared for the event or knew what they were doing exactly, but it was a lot of juggling and a lot of adapting.
What are you noticing in the aftermath? I mean, when you have a huge fire, a huge event like that creates so much devastation, I'd imagine that really presents a lot of new challenges to you as a property owner. What are some of those challenges?
I think right now it's just juggling with insurance, right? Insurance is very, very busy. Most insurance is actually dealing with placing tenants into buildings right now, right? Like, providing rent assistance and stuff like that. So they haven't gotten to the place where they're that focused on property buildings yet. But we're obviously juggling through that. So that's definitely a hassle to juggle through. And just kind of the lack of knowledge as well, right? Like I've never had one of our buildings burned down or even see a whole entire city burned down, right? And so kind of navigating that, learning as much as possible what to do in this kind of environment is something that I'm going through. But I think with these challenges, they also present opportunities. Like eventually the city of Altadena has to be rebuilt. And by being an owner there and also and owning land, I think we have an advantage in terms of that rebuilding process. So, on the private equity side of our business, we're constantly looking at opportunities to be part of that rebuilding process.
Not to dwell too much on this, but it is so recent in the news and such a huge event in rebuilding. And I'm sure it's still way too early to really know how you're going to rebuild and what you can rebuild. But what do you think the new considerations will be going forward as far as preventing this, building something that will prevent this from happening again? Like, are there, I know I used to live in California, so I knew when they had the earthquake codes, people had to go and retrofit their homes to withstand earthquakes. Do you see that type of thing happening now in the future as far as fires?
In our building codes, we're already like introducing many of those codes, right? So for example, fire sprinklers. I think newer buildings suffered less because they had fire sprinklers.
On the inside or outside? Like where, because I know like having sprinkling systems is very helpful inside a building to prevent fire coming from inside, which is where most of them start. But in this case, the fire was coming from outside. Do you have sprinkling on the outside as well?
For our new construction that we just built and is currently going through lease up, we have both, right? So it's both on the exterior side of the building as well as inside like hallways of the building on the interior sides. So I think in terms of codes wise, there's definitely updates since kind of like the 60s and 70s constructed buildings. So I think, and also just like the way the buildings are made, right? For example, like concrete buildings are obviously better than wood when it comes to, situations of fires. So maybe there'd be new codes as to how, the buildings need to be built, or how like maybe the walls need to have a higher fire rating than currently is. But these codes are still kind of in the works, right? Nobody really knows what standards they're going to be placed at right now. But I think there's definitely going to be more restrictive standards when it comes to building new construction.
Because your family is building new developments as well as acquiring existing ones, just as a basic threshold for your future developments, what do you expect to be implementing?
I think for us on the building side of things, we're really just going to follow the codes. We're not necessarily going to go above and beyond the codes, just because it wouldn't make sense on the return side if we do that. But I think maybe we would get more coverage on the insurance. I think that side of the equation makes more sense. Maybe it eats into a little bit of our cash flows because of higher premiums, but at least that's something that's adjustable. Whereas if we completely change our buildings into more fireproof or something like that, the cost would rise significantly to a degree that it wouldn't make sense on the investing side.
When you look out at your portfolio as it exists now and what you're trying to achieve going forward, what do you see in the next 3, 5, 10 years for your portfolio?
For California, it's going to continue to slowly expand, right? As we 1031 out of properties, as we introduce new equity into properties, I think it's definitely going to continue to expand. I don't think we're going to see as much, distress in this specific market, just because most buyers are either cash buyers or very high net worth private individuals that don't put on like extremely risky debt, right? So the amount of syndicators that we have in this market is significantly less in some of the other markets. So I think for California, it's going to be a slow and gradual growth for us. And then in terms of outside California, we're constantly looking for distressed things, right? I think people that were too aggressive in 2021 there's going to be a time where they have to eventually realize that. And that's kind of when we're ready to take on some of that distress.
What are some of the areas around the country that you're looking at?
We really like high growth markets. So for example, we're looking at Texas right now, heavy focus in Dallas, heavy focus in Houston, also looking into like the Carolinas and Georgia. And so really focused on kind of the major metros across the country.
What areas do you like in North Carolina and Georgia?
For North Carolina, we really like kind of the Research Triangle areas. It is heavy on the supply side, but I think it also has really good kind of demand drivers that are driving population growth and driving demand as well. So I think Research Triangle for kind of the North Carolina areas. And then for Georgia, kind of Atlanta, Savannah, trying to find opportunities in high growth areas.
When you look at those opportunities, what do you kind of focus on? I mean, what class, what year built? What are some of the parameters that you're looking for?
I really like to go kind of like the 80s to the maybe 2010 vintage. So probably kind of like the Class B properties. I think those properties have good upside and good value add stories to them. I would also look at Class A if like it's just a really, really good deal, right? I try to target to the mid to high teens return. So Class A usually is tough to hit those, but there are once in a while if it's like a super distressed Class A building or something like that. But yeah, I typically buy Class B buildings with a value add strategy and model it to like a 5-year hold plan.
You come from a family of entrepreneurs, very successful in a different industry and then successful in this industry. How do you define your role in your family when it comes to carving out your destiny here with real estate?
It's a very like expansion focused role. My parents built a really good base for me, right? It's a very good foundation. However, my goal is kind of try to expand on top of that foundation, right? Having, in years later, having billions of dollars under management, potentially drawing institutional equity and partnering and joint venturing with them is kind of my goals going forward.
Tell our listeners how they can find out more about you, get a hold of you. I mean, wherever you'd like to direct them.
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so please reach out there. You can also find more information on us as well as reach out on our website, www.motivaholdings.com.
Could you spell that, Motiva Holdings?
Motiva holdings.com.
What is your favorite hack or app?
I love LinkedIn. I think it's the place where I spend a lot of time every day, learn a lot of new things every day, and also make great connections. I think if whether you're an owner operator or you're a family office member or whatever, I think getting on LinkedIn will have a great ROI for you.
Well, Zihao, thanks for coming on the show today. And it's interesting because I thought the conversation was going to be more about just the restrictiveness of the California market and how you're navigating it. But you brought this additional layer of just having survived the recent fire there and what you went through. And I really appreciate you sharing that story. A really great success story that you shared with us today. And I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. And remember to save the date for the Midwest Real Estate Investor Conference on April 24th and 25th of 2025 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's going to be an event you won't want to miss, packed with invaluable sessions and opportunities to connect with like-minded investors. Keep listening for more updates, and we look forward to seeing you there. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB & Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.